Did you know Sega started in the 1950s as a company making coin-operated machines? Originally called service games, they produced jukeboxes and arcade machines for US military bases in Japan. By the 1980s, they dominated the arcade scene with hits like Space Harrier, Hang On, and Outrun. But here's the turning point: as home consoles like the NES gained popularity, Sega decided to make the leap from arcades to living rooms. Their first attempt was the SG-1000 in 1983, but it flew under the radar. However, this laid the groundwork for Sega's bold entry into the console market, setting the stage for their legendary rivalry with Nintendo. In 1985, Sega launched the Master System to take on Nintendo's NES. Technically, it was more powerful, it could display more colors and had a better sound chip. It even introduced accessories like 3D glasses for certain games. But here's the catch: Nintendo had an iron grip on the market. They locked third-party developers into exclusive deals, meaning the biggest games, like Mega Man and The Legend of Zelda, couldn't come to Sega's system. While the Master System struggled in the US and Japan, it found success in Europe and Brazil, where it became a cultural phenomenon. In fact, it's still beloved in Brazil, where new games were released well into the 2010s. Despite its regional wins, the Master System couldn't dethrone Nintendo, but Sega wasn't done yet. In 1989, Sega launched the Genesis, known as the Mega Drive outside the US, and it became their first major success. They marketed it as the cooler, more mature alternative to Nintendo, with their iconic slogan, "Genesis does what Nintendo don't." Games like Sonic the Hedgehog, Streets of Rage, and Mortal Kombat made the Genesis a must-have. Sega even embraced edgier content, releasing an uncensored version of Mortal Kombat with blood, while Nintendo's version was toned down. The Genesis became a cultural phenomenon in North America, outselling the NES and putting real pressure on Nintendo. This was Sega's golden era, where they weren't just competing, they were winning. But with success came bold risks, and not all of them would pay off. The 16-bit era wasn't just about consoles, it was about loyalty. You were either Team Sega or Team Nintendo. The Genesis brought the fight to Nintendo's SNES with bold marketing and an edgy image, while Nintendo stuck to their family-friendly reputation. The two companies took shots at each other constantly. Sega's blast processing campaign made the Genesis seem faster, even though it wasn't technically true. Meanwhile, Nintendo had iconic games like Super Mario World and The Legend of Zelda, a link to the past. This rivalry wasn't just about sales, it pushed innovation. Sega's success forced Nintendo to step up their game, giving us some of the best titles in history. It's no exaggeration to say the console wars defined an entire generation of gaming. In the early 90s, Sega tried to stay ahead of the curve with add-ons for the Genesis, the Sega CD and the 32X. The Sega CD introduced full-motion video games like Night Trap and Sonic CD, while the 32X promised 32-bit power for your 16-bit console. But here's the problem: both were expensive, had limited games, and confused consumers. Why buy a $300 Sega CD when the Genesis was still getting great games? And the 32X came out just before the Sega Saturn, splitting the market even further. Instead of helping Sega maintain dominance, these add-ons hurt their reputation. Players and developers started to lose faith in Sega's ability to deliver, which spelled trouble for their next console. The Sega Saturn launched in 1995, but instead of dominating the new 32-bit era, it stumbled hard. Why? Sega's strategy backfired. The Saturn's surprise early release, announced at E3, left retailers and developers scrambling. Imagine hearing, "It's available, right now," but most stores didn't even have stock, and big retailers like Walmart were left out entirely. Developers were blindsided too. Games meant to build hype weren't ready, leaving the Saturn with a weak launch lineup. Meanwhile, Sony was waiting in the wings with the PlayStation, which launched later but with a lower price tag and much better marketing. The Saturn wasn't a bad console, it had incredible titles like Virtua Fighter 2 and Panzer Dragoon. But poor communication, lack of third-party support, and competition from the PlayStation doomed it. Sega's reputation was badly damaged, setting the stage for their last shot, the Dreamcast. When the Dreamcast launched in 1999, it was a breath of fresh air. Sega packed it with innovations: online multiplayer with a built-in modem, the visual memory unit, VMU, that displayed extra game info, and groundbreaking games like Shenmue, Jet Set Radio, and Sonic Adventure. It was the first console to really push online gaming years before Xbox Live. But here's the problem: Sega's financial troubles from the Saturn era never went away. Add in the fact that EA refused to release its sports games for the Dreamcast, and it was a tough uphill battle. Then Sony's PlayStation 2 came along, with DVD playback as a bonus feature, completely overshadowing Sega's offerings. Despite selling over 9 million units, Sega just couldn't compete. In 2001, they bowed out of the hardware race, leaving fans with one of the greatest what-ifs in gaming history. The Dreamcast wasn't just a console, it was Sega's swan song. When Sega exited the console business in 2001, many thought it was the end. But instead of disappearing, Sega reinvented itself as a third-party game developer. Suddenly, franchises like Sonic the Hedgehog and Virtua Fighter were appearing on PlayStation and Xbox, platforms that had once been competitors. Sega didn't just stick to their old IPs, they started publishing new franchises like Yakuza in 2005, which became a massive hit for fans of story-driven action games. They also acquired Creative Assembly, the developers behind the Total War series, solidifying their presence in the PC gaming market. While some fans hoped for a return to consoles, Sega found a way to stay relevant. They adapted to the industry's evolution, proving that their creativity wasn't tied to hardware. Today, they're a key player in gaming's history and its future. Sega's consoles may be gone, but their games define generations of gamers. Think of Sonic the Hedgehog, the blue blur that gave Mario a real rival, or Streets of Rage, a beat-em-up classic that's still beloved today. Then there's Golden Axe, Shinobi, and Phantasy Star, games that pushed what was possible on the Genesis and Master System. Sega's innovation didn't stop there. The Virtua Fighter series revolutionized 3D fighting games, and Crazy Taxi brought arcade energy to home consoles. And let's not forget Jet Set Radio, a game so ahead of its time with its cel-shaded art and rebellious spirit that it still feels fresh today. Even in modern times, franchises like Yakuza and Total War continue to deliver. Sega isn't just about nostalgia, they've proven that their legacy is built on a foundation of unforgettable games. Since the Dreamcast, fans have wondered, will Sega ever return to making consoles? While it's unlikely, there have been glimmers of hope. In recent years, Sega has leaned into nostalgia with retro releases like the Genesis Mini and the upcoming Dreamcast-inspired controllers. These have shown that fans are still hungry for Sega hardware, even if it's just a taste of the past. Sega's focus today is on publishing and revitalizing their franchises. The Yakuza series has reached global acclaim, and their collaborations with studios like Atlus, behind Persona, show their strength in creating memorable experiences. Could Sega ever compete in the modern console market? It would take a miracle, but the fan base is there. Until then, their legacy lives on in the games and innovations that define an era. Who knows what the future holds? One thing's certain, Sega will always be a giant in gaming history.